I'm really excited to be here because I think that there are some important things that we want to talk about after the first year. I want to put into a little bit of context what I'm about to say, which is a little bit more critical than what Norm said. But the idea that we're here at all talking about transparency says a lot. We wouldn't have been here at all a year and a half ago. Nobody would have had it on an agenda, and nobody would have cared about it. And that makes a big difference. And I think the point about releasing the White House visitor logs is a very important one, that was a huge step, and one that I think most people around the country looked at and said, that's really important. That said, I still have three somewhat related issues about what's happening, and I think maybe it's just a little bit of impatience on one level, but on another level, I think there are three kind of areas. One is cultural, another is legal, and a third is practical, and I'll just take those really quickly, one at a time. I was really interested to hear that the idea that what government is up to as a culture, that's what I consider the accountability side of transparency, was a high priority in the White House, because that's an area where I haven't seen as much progress. I feel that what we see is a real embracing of the participation and collaboration side of open government, and not as much about accountability. That's harder, obviously. I mean, nobody wants to really lay themselves out there. But as the most recent example of a cultural issue, I believe it was this week, there was a New Yorker piece about the press's relationship with the White House, most of which is irrelevant to this conversation. But in it, Anita Dunn, who I realize is not with the White House anymore, said that she didn't believe that transparency included how government makes decisions, only what those decisions were and why they were made that way. And I found that a little troubling to come from someone who had been that closely related in the White House. And I've heard other things like it, that I'm not sure that the culture has really changed, even at the highest levels, as opposed to throughout the government. The real issue is whether or not records, information, are the government's to dole out, or whether they're the public's to get after they've been held by the government kind of for us. And I'm not sure that that culture shift is as swift as we would like to see it. And I think that it would change a lot very quickly if that culture could be moved. The legal one that I think I'm a little bit concerned about is also a move to kind of datafy the concept of open records. And what concerns me is I know that in my work, most of the records that I've gotten in the past fell under some sort of discretionary release, that there was some balancing act that said that, the public's right to this for certain purposes or trumps something like privacy or other issues. And one thing that happens is that as we insist that everything go through a data port and everything be posted on the internet, that balancing test goes away, and we may actually see some closing of records. That if people are under so much pressure to say that everything has to be out and in data form, that we're maybe not getting even as much as we had before. And I've heard stories still from people as recently as last week and the week before about records that fell under that kind of area. And I don't know whether these were formal FOIAs or not, but things like who is making the decisions on race to the top funds, who is the decision board, and what do those applications look like. Things like nursing home inspections, still not releasing the comments from the field surveyors. Things like that are kind of on that edge of where you have to make a balancing test. And I'm still hearing a lot of stories where that balancing test is going the other way, and I worry that it will continue to go the other way even more, as it's almost like an overreaction to the concept of transparency. And the third one is practical, which I'm going to kind of just let me segue into some suggestions that I would love to see OMB and the government in general take on, that maybe would both reduce workload for FOIA officers and also really instill in an institutional sense the sense of transparency for the sake of accountability. One is that the information on data.gov is not the information that the government uses to make its own decisions. I believe that some data sets were even taken down recently because of privacy concerns. And so one of the things that I look at is what kinds of records, what could be done in the Open Government Directive. And the most obvious one to me is to have agencies look at their FOIA records and see what is a high-value data set according to the public. And what is the public asking for? What have they downloaded a lot from the agency? I've seen very little on data.gov, with a few very notable exceptions, that wasn't already readily available elsewhere in the agency already. Now, nobody would ever say that it's a bad thing that you no longer have to be an expert and obsessed with open records and obsessed with looking at government agencies in order to get to that information. That's wonderful. But it's not really, for the people who are involved in accountability, not really very different. So one of the things that I would hope to see is to look over the FOIA logs, see what people are asking for, see what people are downloading, see what people are getting. Another thing that, and I don't know the rules on this, I wanted to look at it before I came here, but I know that the OMB has to check every information collection periodically about, what is an agency collecting from the public, what is it collecting from governments, what is it collecting from companies. And as part of that, one way to think about institutionalizing openness would be to have a requirement that says, how are you going to make the public parts of this public? And I believe there's a provision in there where they already have to say how they're going to keep the secret parts secret, but I don't think the opposite is true. I'm not sure of that. There was some change in '96 law, but I would love to see a little bit more focus from the perspective of when you're creating record collections to build them with the expectation that they will be made public. And when I was a reporter in Florida, the Florida state government made that rule, and it took about 10 years before it totally changed the way that records are being released in Florida now. And it was really successful. It happens that 10 years crossed Y2K, so maybe it was a little faster there. But and then the other thing is that there are certain government records that across every agency are wildly important and have been ruled over and over again to be public. Among them are lists of political appointees in every agency. Another one is the calendar of the cabinet level, this cabinet secretary. Another one is correspondence logs, particularly correspondence from Congress. There may or may not be reasons why those have to be on the web or can't be on the web, but there ought to be a middle ground somewhere. We expect that those are going to be requested, and you don't have to go through the entire FOIA process, bog down the FOIA office, but just say, every week, here's Secretary Clinton's schedule. We've redacted what has to be redacted. Now just put it in the pile for whenever anybody asks for it. So what I would hope to see is kind of that institutionalization as the administration moves forward into that area of accountability records, as well as the participation and the collaboration. But having said that, the reason I'm saying this is because if this administration is such a big change attitudinally that I would love to see things institutionalized so that first it can happen a little faster, and second so that it can outlast this president.